Meanwhile, Steve continued at his computer station searching for and monitoring information as it came in. He heard the door slide open behind him. He spun around to see Mickey there facing him, as she slid the door closed behind her with Akon standing guard outside. "You're not supposed to come in here," said Steve. "I know, it's just that you're working so very hard, and I wanted to express my appreciation," replied Mickey softly and demurely, as she started to walk forward seductively, placing and sliding one leg in front of the other. "And you're such a big, strong American man, I just find myself enthralled and infatuated with you." Mickey dropped down onto her knees in front of Steve. She placed her hands on his knees, gently pushing his legs apart and moving in closer. "What are you doing? You're going to hurt your knees on this type of floor," said Steve. "Don't worry about me," replied Mickey, as her white-gloved hands reached out and unbuckled Steve's belt. She then took hold of the sides of his pants and gently pulled them down to his knees. She then slipped the tips of her fingers under the waistband of his boxers and pulled them down to reveal his member. She took hold of him with her white-gloved hands, raising him up. "You certainly are a big, rich American man. I hope my small Asian mouth can fit it all," she remarked as she parted her lips and lowered her head down. Steve leaned back in his chair and placed his hands behind his head. Mickey's head bobbed up and down as soft muffled sounds came from her mouth. "I could get used to this sort of Chinese hospitality. Just make sure you work at it as hard as I do," he said. In the changing room, Ryoko and Mikaru stowed their guns, ammunition, and other gear to be serviced. They then began to strip off their clothing. Ryoko removed her knee pads, then her boots. She pulled her cap off. She removed her gloves, then untied her tar flap. She unbuttoned her blouse and slid it off her shoulders and arms. She reached back and unzipped her skirt and let it fall down her legs, pooling around her feet. Finally, she slid off each one of her stockings. Each item tossed into a basket as they came off, leaving her in only her white satin basic bra and panties. Mikaru removed her clothing as well. She pulled her gloves off, then took hold of the hem of her sweater dress and pulled it up and over her head and off her body. She flopped off her shoes and pulled off her socks, leaving her in her basic white bra and panties as well. The two girls then removed their bras and panties, laying them on top of the pile of clothes in the baskets as they entered into the bathing area. Ryoko broke with protocol of washing before entering the bath, and gently eased her body down into the warm water up to her chin, and laid her head back on the edge of the bath and closed her eyes to relax. Mikaru, a little more nervous, followed suit, and entered the warm water on the opposite side of Ryoko, and slowly lowered into the water, sitting in the bath further from the edge, with her knees up to her chin resting on top of them, her lips even with the water, and she started to blow bubbles in the water. On the men's side of the bath, Lex sat nude on a small hinoki wood stool, washing himself. White suds grouped and bubbled up on his bristling muscles. His broad wide back and shoulders, massively developed biceps and forearms, well-toned gigantic pectorals, and six-pack abs, not to mention massively powerful legs. Lex glided the sponge down his arms and across his chest. "I'll wash your back if you want me to," came the soft voice of Kuro Silk from behind him. Lex stopped and paused for a moment, then turned at the waist and looked over his left shoulder to see Kuro Silk standing just inside the curtains to the bathing area. Her long, tall body standing there in her strapless shiny white satin bra with lace around the side strap and her tight, firm-fitting shiny white satin thong. She stood there softly rubbing her bare thighs together as she gently twisted her hips while in the entranceway. As Lex watched, she reached behind herself and unhooked her bra, pulling it away from her body, revealing her petite breasts, as she tossed it back into the changing area by the basket with the rest of her clothes. She then reached down and slowly removed her thong, sliding it down her long, smooth legs as her hair cascaded to one side. When she reached her ankles, she slowly stepped out 1 foot at a time. As she stood back up, she tossed her thong back inside as she had done with her bra. She stood there, her tall, pale, slender body on display for Lex to view. Lex turned back, facing away from her. "We have public bathhouse culture in Germany as well. This is not proper behavior," said Lex as he resumed scrubbing his front. Kuro Silk glided forward across the tile floor over to Lex. She sank down onto her knees behind him. She laid against him, pressing her bare breasts against his bare back. Kuro Silk placed her hands on his hips and slid them around Lex's waist. She moved her hands up over his wet, soapy body. her fingers moving up over the deep gullies in high round masses of his rippling abs. Her heart beat faster, her breath began to pant, and passion began to burn in her southern bodily region. She gasped for air as her hands took hold of his pecs, too massive for her hands to hold, as she began to softly kiss Lex across the back of his shoulders and neck. She took the sponge from Lex's hands and began to use it to wash his front side. Lex sat straight up. Kuro Silk could feel the power of his body as she still laid pressed against it. With her breast still against his back, she brought the sponge back around Lex's body and began to wash his back, the soap and water lathering both their bodies. In a flash, Lex turned, taking Kuro Silk, spinning her around and laying her on her back with himself atop her on the warmed, wet tile floor. "So, do I have to sully you more than you already are, or do I take you into the bath and vigorously clean you?" said Lex as he lay on top of Kuro Silk. "Both," she answered. "This is one of the few aspects in my life where I want to be the one who gets dominated, and as a freakishly tall Japanese woman, it's very hard to find a man who is taller than myself, and I don't want to let this opportunity be missed, especially since this might be the last opportunity before the end of the world," said Kuro Silk. "Well, I've seen you in action. You could be Hachishaku-sama," said Lex. "You know the legend." "I guarantee I'll be much more pleasant," replied Kuro Silk. "I won't disappoint. Germans are known for power, efficiency, and attention to detail," returned Lex as he pressed his naked body fully against hers. Kuro Silk gasped for breath as she felt Lex's tremendous German power slide up into her. Her back arched slightly, her bare breasts pushed against Lex's hard pectorals. "Damn, I was hoping to have a shot at that," said Brittany to herself, as she stood just outside the curtains to the bathing area, her back against the wall, hands resting on the stock of her rifle, as she listened to the sounds coming out of the bathing area after sneaking back in. "Oh well, maybe she swings both ways. I always was a sucker for the tall ones, and she's definitely one of the tallest." Brittany picked herself up from against the wall and started to leave when she heard a splash into the bath. "Well, I guess it can't hurt staying wet during this type of activity."